Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well, and welcome to today's bonus. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost you a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go, and folks, they definitely matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into today's bonus, shall we? Tonight's first encounter. This is not my experience. This is my dad's, and he has shared this with us our entire lives. Actually, everyone in the family knew of this encounter since he had mentioned it many times before. So, to the best of my ability, I will retell his encounter. It was near the end of the war. My dad and a small platoon were stationed by a small village during the Vietnam War. It was nighttime with a full moon as he went on his usual patrol of an area which took him slightly out of the village and near a farm. Then he had to loop back around. Usually my dad would do this with another soldier, but on this day, due to a few injured soldiers, his lieutenant felt that there should be more men to secure the village, so my dad had to do patrol alone. Naturally, he felt a bit uncomfortable, but he had to follow orders. So, he was alone, and as he was making his way near the farm, he saw a large, hairy figure walking in the field. He could see it clearly due to the moonlight. He realized he was not looking at a human, but a rock ape. Now, a rock ape was a mysterious Bigfoot-like creature that the soldiers saw during the Vietnam War. They claimed to see them while they were fighting in the jungles. Naturally, he stopped wanting to watch the creature as it didn't notice him, and he wanted to see this rock ape. So as the rock ape was walking in the field of this farm, my dad saw another hairy creature come out from behind the house on the farm. At first, he thought it was the farm owner's dog until it stood on its hind legs, slowly walking towards the rock ape, clearly ready to attack. My dad would have mistaken it for another rock ape if its wolf-like features didn't give it away. It was a Dogman. As my dad watched, he was frozen. He wasn't trained for this. As the Dogman got closer to the rock ape, then suddenly it happened. The Dogman jumped onto the rock ape from behind, biting into the rock ape's neck. The rock ape freaked out and tried to push the Dogman, but the Dogman had a strong hold over the rock ape's neck. Eventually, when the Dogman let go and readjust its hold, the rock ape managed to push this dog-like creature back. The Dogman then jumped at the rock ape again, but the rock ape with one arm grabbed the Dogman by the throat and slammed the creature to the ground. The Dogman barked and clawed at the rock ape. The rock ape still had the Dogman pinned with one arm, but at this point, despite being strong, was losing a lot of blood and began to struggle with holding this Dogman down. The rock ape then made a whistling noise. Then another whistling noise was heard in the distance as this Dogman was able to break free of the rock ape's grip. 5 more of these creatures began to appear, charging toward the Dogman, which was spooked and ran towards the jungle. The rock apes that arrived carried the injured rock ape away, and my dad began to walk carefully back to the village. When my dad arrived, he had told everyone what he had seen, but nobody believed him, so he stopped talking about what he had seen. My dad had never seen after another Dogman or a rock ape, but this tale has terrified him. Tonight's second encounter. I live in the mountains, and I do love it here. There is no better place. It's quiet and peaceful, or so I thought. The first time I had heard a strange sound was when I was getting ready for bed and I was walking by the window. I heard what sounded like a mixture of a lion, elk, and a wolf. It was so loud it made my dog jump to his feet and run to the window. I ran to the window and looked out, half thinking I'd see a giant dog outside, but there was nothing there. I went to the kitchen and turned the floodlight on and looked outside. I couldn't see anything. I turned the light out and went to bed. My dog, on the other hand, was not happy with whatever we had heard. The next day I went to work and I noticed there was a bloody mess in the side yard. I walked over and looked at the pile. It looked like rabbit parts, and it was very bloody with little clumps of meat and fur. It looked like it had been torn up and eaten on. I poked at it for a second, and then I thought a dog must have gotten to it. I flung the rest into the woods, not realizing there was no bones or meat inside. Now, there are a lot of rabbits that use my side yard as a kitchen, as well as a large group of deer, because the area is habitat protected. So the deer population gets pretty big. The next night, when I pulled into my driveway, my lights hit a large form. At first, it looked like a bear or a really large dog, but when my headlights hit it, it raised its head, and what I saw was strange, like a dog or a wolf, but large like a bear. When the lights lit it leapt up and ran toward the woods. I slammed on the brakes and just sat there, staring out the window. What the hell was that, I thought. I jumped out of the truck and grabbed my flashlight. Yeah, I know, stupid. I ran towards where I saw this thing. When I got to the spot in the yard, I saw a deer torn up, blood everywhere. I point the flashlight toward the trees, and as I move it across, the light hits a pair of eyes. They soon disappear. I look at the pile of blood and decide to call the police or animal control. The next morning, the police come by and take a look at the pile of deer that was left, and I told her what I saw. She said it didn't look like a bear attack, but she wasn't an expert, but she had seen enough. She did say that there had been a lot of calls to deal with wild dog and a few coyotes. I said that I never saw a coyote around here, but what I saw was way bigger than a dog or even a big wolf. She looked around and went into the woods to see if she could find any tracks. However, said she couldn't see anything. As she left, she said that if I think it's still around, maybe put a trap camera or something and definitely keep an eye on my animals. Later that night, I was in the garage when I heard the same sound as a couple of nights ago. I grabbed a flashlight and ran outside. I shined the light around towards the woods, but couldn't see anything. I then heard it again and closer this time. I pointed the light in the direction, but couldn't see anything. I remained outside for another minute, then remembered that if it is a large predator, what am I going to do with a flashlight? Walked back into the garage and shut the door. Everything seemed to go quiet, and I started to put it out of my mind. Then I was watching TV when I heard a god-awful sound, which made me jump out of my skin, and my dog jumped up and started barking at the back door. The sound sounded like it was right on my back porch, and my dog was losing his mind. I jumped up and grabbed my bat as my heart pounded out of my chest, and then there was a squeak of wood on the porch. Then a sound like a growl, followed by a sound of a chain-link fence shaking. At that point, my dog ran to the door and wanted out. I went over and turned on the porch light. There was nothing back there. I pulled my dog back and opened the door slowly, and my dog sprinted past me before I could grab him. And he ran to the far side of the fenced-in yard. It started barking and running up and down the fence. I stepped out onto the porch, and I looked down, and I saw a very large, muddy print that I thought looked like a giant dog print. It had rained earlier, so it was a bit muddy right by the steps. I went to grab my phone, and as I walked back, my dog was getting crazier. I took a picture of the print, and then I called my dog back. I snapped a few pictures toward where my dog was barking and called him again. Finally, he gave up and came back. As he came back up, He stopped at the print and sniffed it and looked at me. I told him, "Get in the house," and when he went in, I saw that he had left a print near the big one, and it was way smaller. I took a pic of it and went inside and called the officer that had come by before. She said send her a photo and she'd send it to animal control and they'd come out and look around. We haven't heard or seen anything since, but my dog has been acting funny still. Tonight's third experience. So this took place in late November of 1944, World War II. My grandfather was a 45-year-old Jew in Nazi Germany. A little bit of background. Since the war had started, he had been hiding in a small town in North Germany in an attic of a family who had 3 children, 2 older boys and 1 younger girl. Since the family was quiet, he managed to be successfully hidden from the Nazis for the most part of the war, except once when the family got a surprise visit. But he managed to sneak out a window and into the backyard shed before he got caught, thanks to the help of the youngest daughter. Now on to his experience. Toward the end of the war, the family could no longer help him as they were struggling to buy enough food for the family, plus a Jew they were hiding in the attic. So in late November of 44, the parents of the family gave him a choice to only eat 1 small meal 3 days per week, since that was all they could afford for him, or he would leave and test his luck. Understanding the family's situation, he chose to leave, as he didn't want the children to starve, and since the Allies were closing in on German advancements, he believed that he would be able to reach Allied territory if he just kept his head down. But before he did that night, they all had one last dinner together and took a photo to remember each other. As the wife was cleaning up, the father of the family gave my grandfather a small knife and about 5 German marks for some food and water. Then, after a quick goodbye, my grandfather, under the cover of night, left the town and now had to fend for himself. He walked to the next town over, where he managed to get caught by a group of 4 SS soldiers who happened to be in the town at the same time, due to a separate investigation. Naturally, he was suspected to be a Jew, and they attempted to capture him. Their suspicions became confirmed when he fought back with the knife, but after 3 of the men held him down, and the 4th pointed his rifle at his head, my grandfather surrendered. My grandfather was put into a small room to act as his cell in the town pub, where the SS group had been set up for camp, and was asked some odd questions about if there were more Jews nearby and where he had been hiding in the past few months. My grandfather was not set for transportation to the concentration camp, as the men were so occupied by their mission in that town. They really didn't care about him too much and only saw him as a sideshow in comparison to the mission. After a few nights in the room, he managed to understand a bit about the SS group and their job. Each night the town had reported a large dog-like creature, and it was killing many of the townfolk, believing that it may be allies or a resistant group of Jews. The 4 were sent to investigate. This apparently spooked the Nazis' high command, so much that they made the mission classified, which is why my grandfather couldn't know much more, like who died and when this all started. This explained the odd questions. Thankfully, the group soon realized during the questions he wasn't involved, so they just put him in a cell. It was that night. There was a full moon, and the 4 came a few nights earlier to prepare, but they were not prepared, because around 9 p.m. there was a loud howling sound which startled everyone. Then about 15 minutes later, from the door they heard a loud crashing sound, which he later learnt was the front door. The soldiers were screaming as they were firing their weapons in panic, then silence. After a few seconds, my grandfather slipped out of the room to check what had happened, and he'd seen all 4 SS soldiers dead with blood and bullet holes everywhere, and the front door broken open. But what made him freeze was the fact that one of the soldiers was being eaten by a wolf-like creature on two legs. This dog-like creature was facing away from my grandfather, so my grandfather slowly slipped away and tried to open the back door, but it was locked. So he slipped back into the room the SS had put him into until morning and did his best to hold the door closed so the creature could not get in. But he knew that was useless, as the creature could easily break in if he wanted to. When morning came, the townfolk blamed my grandfather for what happened, and he used it to scare the townfolk to let him escape, which barely worked, as even though he did manage to leave, the men of the town who were hunters got their rifles and began to fire at my grandfather when he was a little bit away from the town. Thankfully, one of the bullets hit him and just went through his shoulder, but he was still lucky. He escaped to the next town where another family, who were already hiding a few other Jews, found him. They checked out his wound. He knew that they would not believe him, and he simply told them his story, but when it came to the town, he basically said that he was unlucky to enter because the night he arrived, 4 soldiers were found dead, and when the town found out he was a Jew, they shot at him, and he escaped. My grandfather has always been haunted by what happened. He often wondered if this creature knew the SS were there for it, or for him. Tonight's final experience. I decided I would share some of my grandfather's experiences he told me about his time working as a forester in Michigan's Manistee National Forest. For some background, my grandfather started working in Manistee area in 1949. He was 28 years old. Before then, he was drifting around the region doing odd jobs and logging until he was hired by the Forest Service in the northwest part of Michigan's Lower Peninsula. The work, as I understand, was slow, and most days he and his crew were sent to different parts of the forest to address various tree and land concerns. My grandfather was always an avid outdoorsman. He enjoyed hunting and fishing just about as much as anyone in the region. Sadly, he died in December of 1998, when I was still rather young, but I remember whenever we went to visit him and my grandmother, he would sit my brother and me down and tell us about his days in the Forest Service. Working outside every day allowed him to witness all sorts of wildlife like black bear, whitetail, fox, and even bobcat back in those days. He often relived his encounters with bears while he was deep in the forest, telling us that those moments were some of the most memorable of his life, being up close to such a beautiful and powerful animal. Usually his experiences were exciting, and the enthusiasm which he told them inspired us to go out to the backyard and look for animals in between the pines. Although there wasn't much wildlife around my grandparents' property, they still always kept a close eye on us and never let us wander too far from the house. Finally, a few years before his death, my grandfather deemed my brother and me old enough to be told why. I was about 9 and my brother was about 11 when my grandfather first opened up about strange things that had happened to him. All our childhoods we had heard him go on and on about a peace that the wilderness brought him, or used to bring him, but this time his tone was completely different. I don't remember all the details, but I asked my brother to help piece together my grandfather's experiences, and my dad as well. He too had heard these experiences in question multiple times. It was the mid-50s, he never gave us the exact year, and October rolled in behind cool autumn breezes and the sounds of Canadian geese flying southward. The first of his strange experiences had occurred at night, as he drove home from a local bar where he and his crew had spent the last few hours after work. It was a windy night, and the pines on either side of the road were blowing around. No moon or stars could be seen through the thick cloud cover, so the only illumination of the road ahead of my grandfather came from his headlights. By his reckoning, he must have been going close to 50 miles an hour at that very moment when something huge leapt across the road not 20 feet in front of him. His headlights had shown the animal's silhouette. It was dog-shaped but massive, almost stretching all the way across the road. It only made one bound to get from one side to the other, and its size alone was enough to unnerve my grandfather. At the time, he had assumed that the animal was just a very large wolf, except timber wolves hadn't been spotted in that region for decades. He considered it a bizarre encounter, but nothing came of it that night, and he was able to return home without anything else strange happening. His second experience admittedly frightened me enough to avoid going outside at night for years. Even now I am weary of noises in the dark because of obvious fear in my grandfather's voice when he told us his second experience. Some of these details were provided by my dad. It occurred the same month as his first experience, a few weeks later, on a night that was pretty cold for the season. It was maybe 40 degrees, but it was a calm night with a little wind. My grandfather's house at the time was really small, and it stood in a lot, about 6 other similar-sized buildings. None of his neighbors tended to stay up very late, so it surprised him to be awakened by loud noises. At about 1 a.m, they sounded like scratching on sheet metal, with occasional thumps and bumps like an animal was trying to get in. My grandfather apparently got up, fetched a flashlight, and put his boots on, and went out into the front room, the walls of which consisted of mosquito screens stretched between wooden frames. Once in the front room, my grandfather could hear sounds more clearly, and they were coming from his nearest neighbor's house, maybe 50 yards to his right. It was incredibly dark out there with no street lights. The neighbor's house had its porch light on, but my grandfather couldn't make out what was creating the racket through the screen, so he slowly opened the front door and looked out. He described to us in great detail the animals that he had seen, and always said he would remember them exactly as they were, for fear brands memories the strongest. 3 massive dogs, covered in long black hair, were up against his neighbor's home, scratching at the siding and making visible claw marks with every swipe. Each beast stood about 7 feet tall, with their front legs stretching for another 2 or 3 feet, and easily reaching the roofing and the gutter of the house. Their scratching, however, did not make it seem like they were trying to get into the house, my grandfather explained. He thought that they were doing that to get whoever was inside out. The next part was actually the hardest to get out of my grandfather. It was strange that he was so eager to tell us everything thus far, despite how he had felt about the subject. But he was rather hesitant, as I remember, to divulge the last horrifying details of this experience. He claims that the creatures then noticed that he had emerged from his house just across the lawn, for each one turned to look straight at him, just 50 yards away. They had pointed ears like a wolf's and huge bodies that rivaled large black bears in size. They also supported themselves not on 4 legs like any other native mammal, but instead they stood on 2, towering 7 feet above the ground. The sounds that they proceeded to make, grandfather said, would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. It was a shame that he could neither produce recordings nor accurately mimic the so un-wolf-like screams these animals made, for that detail always fascinated me the most about this story. They didn't sound like fox, coyotes, or bobcats. Instead, they forced half-scream, half-howls out of their jaws that my grandfather was sure held the teeth of a carnivore. Grandpa never told us exactly what happened next. I guess we assumed that he ran inside, locked the doors, and did not look outside until morning. He would tell us that 4 of his neighbors, including the elderly couple that lived in the nearest house, didn't stick around very long. He did say that he tried to talk to them about what had happened that night, but they remained evasive and never gave him any straight answers. That turned out to be somewhat ironic because my grandfather himself kept tight-lipped about many of the details in these experiences. He would say that he heard those exact screams on 2 other occasions, both times while he was in the Manistee Forest. And he had showed us an old Forest Service report detailing a possible timber wolf sighting in the area, complete with photographs of huge pawed paw prints in the mud. The thing is, Grandfather never told anyone his experiences but his most trusted family, which is unique among Michigan Dogman witnesses. After the craze that Steve Cook's Legend song stirred in the 80s, it's no wonder that so many stories from the region surfaced. I had heard a few bits and pieces about the so-called monster before Grandfather had told us his experiences, but it wasn't until later in life that I realized his encounters had to have been with the same creature. Whether I believe him that massive wolves walk upright through Michigan's forest, well, I'm still not so sure, but as a modern zoological curiosity, the stories of strange beasts from a passionate woodsman who knew his wildlife certainly remain among the most remarkable I had ever heard, simply because of the genuine emotion with which he relayed his experiences. Legends like these might just be figments of our collective imagination, so all I can do is present what I heard, and let others judge for themselves what is real and what is not. Alright folks, I hope you all enjoyed this bonus as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you for supporting the channel. It is, after all, your support that keeps the channel growing and going, and honestly what gives people a chance and a place to share their experiences and theories judgment-free. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real, they are out there, and they are dangerous. Share this information with the people you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for answers, and God bless.